Good evening and welcome to the College Avenue two-way conversion open house. I'm Janelle Bunton with INDY DPW, and tonight we'll be looking at the proposal to convert between Market Street and Massachusetts Avenue to two-way traffic to improve connectivity from Market Street to Mass Avenue. I'm joined tonight by Jill Palmer, INDY DPW's multimodal program manager, and also Will Tolbert, our design consultant from WSP. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. We'd appreciate everyone staying muted to avoid any unnecessary feedback during the meeting. You can also type questions in the chat function during the presentation. We'll answer them in a specific Q&A portion later on after the presentation is completed. And a link of the recording will be available at our website under Major Transportation and Infrastructure Projects later this week. That link is also on the final slide where you can access that, the meeting recording, or you can email me and I'll send it to you directly. So without further ado, we'll turn this over to Jill Palmer from INDY DPW and she can get us started. Jill?
Thanks, Janelle, and thanks everyone who's able to join us. This is kind of strange because I can't see anyone doing virtual meetings, but I hope many of you are able to join us to learn a little bit about this project this evening. I'd like to give just a kind of a general overview of the project, and then I'll turn it over to the design team to get into more detail. But generally, the purpose of this project in converting College from one-way northbound traffic to two-way traffic is to improve connectivity for all modes of travel. Obviously, with one-way traffic, you're limited to going northbound. But also with that, by converting the vehicle traffic to two-way, we think that will slow down vehicle speeds, which greatly improves safety for pedestrians and for bicyclists. Regarding two-way conversions in general, we have had a lot of questions about other corridors, and we've done some studies. This particular project was prioritized because of its proximity to the Bottleworks development, which is, I think, partially open and still under construction. We have some projects already completed in a one-way to two-way conversion. We have several that are just kicking off design, and there are several more that are off in the more distant future. So we have kind of taken a comprehensive list or comprehensive view of the various one-way streets and which ones might be eligible for conversion in the future. So this project, the project limits are from Market Street to the intersection of Massachusetts and St. Clair. Our schedule for this project, we are currently at about 30% design. The plan tentatively is to bid this fall and construct it next season. As you all know, we have another little construction project going on downtown called the North Split. Initially, when we programmed this project, the thinking was that College Avenue would not serve a large amount of the diverted traffic. Now, of course, we still don't quite know. We were out monitoring things very closely today. We're not entirely sure what routes people are going to take. Of course, the official INDOT detour is to take 465 around the city, but we know people are going to come downtown and find their way around the various streets. So we're going to take a couple weeks and figure out, where is traffic ending up downtown? Is College Avenue affected or not? And if we do find that it's effective, I think we may consider postponing. It's not our goal to make bad things even worse. Our hope is that College is not affected and we can go ahead with this project. But if it is taking a lot of traffic from that North Split, then we will consider delaying. But again, we are at 30% design, which means we don't have all of the answers right now. It's not fully designed. So we really welcome your feedback and your questions. But we may not have all the answers for you yet. We may have to take your ideas with us as we continue with the design. But this is the time when we are able to influence the project and make some changes early on. So that's why we wanted to have a meeting early in the project while there's still an opportunity to influence the outcome. So I appreciate your patience. Certain things, if we're not able to answer them today, we will consider them as we continue with the project. So just generally as a broad overview, the project is going to be completed within the existing curb area. The road is not going to be widened from its current footprint. In order to go from one-way traffic to two-way traffic, we'll have to make some modifications to the traffic signals, the signs, and the pavement markings. We're also going to include a bicycle connection between the Michigan and New York bicycle lanes that already exist and the cultural trail, which comes in just south of St. Clair Street. So we're planning to connect that with dedicated bicycle facilities. And we'll also make a few upgrades if we need to curb ramps and other equipment in order to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that's just kind of a general overview. And we've got the project location map shown there on the screen. I'm going to turn it over to Will Tolbert with our design consultant to continue with some more details. Thank you, Will.
Thanks, Jill, and good evening, everybody. And Jill, it was a great overview of the project, and I'll add a couple little notes to go with it. One, when Jill talks about staying within the existing footprint of the roadway, that is another way of saying there will not be any anticipated right-of-way acquisition on this project. So everything that will be constructed will be within the existing city right-of-way. That is the current plan on the project. Another thing I'll add to that is Jill mentioned the traffic signal design, and in accompaniment with that, there will be a revisiting of the traffic signal timings. Obviously, going from a one-way northbound condition to having two directions of travel, that will warrant looking at how do the timings work to make that traffic operation efficient. So that will also be part of what we're doing. I saw a really good question come in the last few days about, well, why is Market Street the south end of the project limits? So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to pull Google Earth over really quick because I think the question indicated, well, it'd be great if the project connected all the way down to Virginia Avenue here in Fletcher Place and then further south to Fountain Square. And the answer to that question is primarily this intersection here at Washington and College, which has a railroad overpass. And I'll jump in street level really quick just to show some of the challenges here. Um, this was just something that was bigger than this project could take on right now as far as working that two-way connectivity through this intersection with all the structure and sightline challenges at the intersection. So that is why for now the project limits are Market Street on the south end. Going back to the project location map, we will talk a little bit more about the bike connectivity here in a second. This, by the way, is the current two-way end of operations on College. This is the north side of the project. We're looking south. This is at the intersection of Massachusetts Avenue, College, and St. Clair. And this is where are proposing to extend that southbound travel down to Market Street. So talking about the bike connectivity a little bit, there are existing bike lanes on Michigan Street and on New York Street, which is a one-way pair that kind of cuts through right through the middle of our project. And also there's the Cultural Trail, which is sort of at the north end of the project. And I'm going to scoot back to the project location map. This is New York right here. So there's a bike lane on New York. There's a bike lane on Michigan, and then here at the north end is where the cultural trail ties in. So what we saw was an opportunity to create these bike connectivity features as part of this project. There really isn't currently a great way to connect on bike from that portion of downtown up to the north end of Mass Ave and the Bottle Works development and the cultural trail. So shortest distance between 2 points, we wanted to go ahead and try and package that with this project if we could. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of our conceptual design here. This is where we were at about 10%. And Jill mentioned we are at 30% design. So some of this has been advanced a little bit as far as roadway geometry. But the 10% design, it's a little easier to see kind of graphically what we were looking at here. This is the south end of the project, and north is to your right here. Here's our north arrow, just to get you oriented. This is Market Street, crossing east-west here, and this is College Avenue. So this again is the south limit of our project. So we're looking at having southbound college operations here, and that it would end here. So you would have to either make a left turn onto Market or a right turn onto Market if you're headed southbound. South of Market, it is business as usual, with college being northbound one way only. One of the things that having this connection at Market provides is there will be some alleviation. If you'll bear with me, I'm gonna pull over Google Earth again and exit Street View here and just look at Market Street and where that fits into a little bit of the bigger picture. Um, so one of the things having southbound traffic be able to connect to Market Street is now folks on College to the north will be able to connect to some of this newer development along Market Street, which there's been a lot of money invested along Market Street in the last, I'd say, 5 to 10 years. And then also coming southbound on Market Street, you're going to be able to connect to the I-65 interchange, which Jill already alluded to North Split, but one of the things, and I'm going to zoom a little bit further out here, one of the things that will go away when the North Split project is done is currently there's access to southbound 65 up here at Delaware Street. You can get on and head south at 65. That connection will be gone. So kind of everyone up here in the Chatham Arch, Bottle Works, kind of north end of College Avenue, who use that Delaware connection, that southbound connection on College will make it easier to get to that southbound 65 and Washington Street interchange without having to work your way back west to get there. So that's another one of the considerations as far as having Market as the south end of the project limit. Moving forward here, we're going to Ohio Street. Oh, let me scoot back one. So here's the intersection of Ohio Street. Here's the intersection of New York Street. Those are both traffic signals currently. One thing that we're hearing from public feedback at the Ohio Street intersection is we're having a lot of folks coming on this approach. This is kind of west as you go into downtown, and this comes directly off the interstate. So people are coming around that turn and going pretty fast coming off the interstate. So we're going to definitely look at some design measures based on the public feedback that we've got to calm that traffic coming off of Ohio Street. Another thing to note about the Ohio Street intersection is that is actually currently an INDOT owned intersection. So there is some coordination going on with INDOT as part of this project, and that will factor into the design there. The New York Street intersection, and you see just up here on the upper right part of the slide, this kind of green section here. This is the connection from the New York Street bike lane, and this little green area, for those who are not familiar, is called a bike box, and that's a way for bikes to get from the right side at a red light. They can cross over into the bike box and proceed then to the connection on College, and we'll show it here. We have the northbound bike lane that we're proposing to construct north of New York and headed towards Michigan Street. So as you can see on this slide, what we're looking at as far as a cross section here, we have a northbound bike lane, and this buffer area is shown as just striping, but we're actually, and we've talked to IHPC as recently as this week, we're looking at doing this as a raised concrete buffer. So that offers extra protection for that northbound bike lane. It does eliminate parking on the east side of College through this stretch. On the west side of College, this is the Lockerbie Square neighborhood. We are trying to preserve as much parking as possible on the west side there, similar to how it is today, except that you do have the southbound travel lane, and we do have a sharrow through that section for southbound bicycles. As we move north, we're now at Michigan Street, and this is kind of an interesting transition for the bike facility, and we'll see why a little bit further down the corridor to the north. But what we're doing here is we're bringing the bicycles on the east side of the street, and we have a bike box here, and there's actually a couple options for the bikes to proceed north. One for probably more advanced or comfortable cyclists, they'll move over in that bike box to the left turn lane, and then when they get the left turn phase, they will actually proceed across the intersection. We have a two-way cycle track that we're proposing on the west side of College Avenue between Michigan Street and the north end of the project. I think for less comfortable cyclists, they can actually use the crosswalk to cross over and then wait for the walk sign and can proceed northbound on the west side of the street in that cycle track. Um, so as we move north from Michigan Street, again, we have this two-way cycle track that will connect up to the Cultural Trail. So that will handle southbound and northbound bikes. It does eliminate the parking on the west side of College for that stretch of the project. We do preserve most of the parking on the east side of College for this stretch of the project. So essentially, from New York up to Mass Ave, on either one side of the street or the other, we are preserving parking, and on the opposite side of the street, we are removing it. One intersection that has also come up quite a bit already in public comment and feedback is the North Street intersection. There are some challenges with sight lines due to the offset nature of the intersection. So Jill and I and the rest of the design team are certainly looking at design solutions that will help mitigate some of the concerns at that intersection, whether it be a pedestrian crossing with flashing beacon or restricting movements, certain turning movements at the intersection or through movements. Certainly weighing that and looking for public comment as far as prioritizing what's the most important there. As we move a little further north, you'll see this right here at the north end of the slide. That's the tie into the Cultural Trail project. Not a great job cutting the sheet, but it actually does happen right here on the edge of the sheet. And that's the tie into the Cultural Trail facilities. And here we finish at the north end at Massachusetts Avenue in St. Clair. This is the street view photo we had at the beginning. We were looking south. Now we are at this intersection, and certainly considering some of the operational challenges here, and saw a good public question about this intersection as well, which is anytime you have 6 approaches on an intersection, operations are challenging. Delay is typically high because you have to serve 6 different approaches. No exception here. We are considering, either left turn restrictions at this intersection, or we're considering keeping the left turn, having a single lane throughput. And there's definitely pick your poison with either approach, but we will weigh those options. And as we move further into design, certainly take into account public feedback and determine what is the best approach there. And that is the north end of the project. I tried to talk through the parking as we went through the corridor. This is kind of a summary of the parking changes. And, folks can access this PowerPoint slide if you can't capture it all right now during the presentation. But essentially, this does represent that there will be a loss of parking along the corridor, typically on one side or the other, depending on where the bike facility is. Uh, we are still weighing, you know, certainly some of the parking changes, particularly on the east side from Market to New York. There are peak hour restricted parking, which we anticipate will remain in place as there is fairly heavy volume of, especially northbound, turning right at Ohio and New York. I think we're certainly weighing whether that should be no parking at all times or whether off-peak parking is warranted there. So that's something we are considering moving forward. And again, the summary of parking can be accessed on the PowerPoint presentation with the link that we'll provide at the end of the slide. In summary, and Jill covered this well at the onset too, we are converting College Ave, or considering converting College Ave from two-way from Market to Mass Ave. This is to improve connectivity for PEDs, pedestrians, bicycles, and vehicles along the corridor, certainly driven by a lot of the recent development, including Bottleworks. We are adding the two-way cycle track on the west side of the street from Michigan to Cultural Trail, and the northbound bike lane and southbound Shero between New York and Michigan along that section of the corridor. And we are, again, utilizing the existing roadway footprint within the city right-of-way to do this work. Any questions or comments? I know we have a comment feature and question feature now that Jill will be looking at, and we'll try to address those questions as they come in. Obviously, additional questions after this time can be sent to Janelle Bunton at the email address below. And then the presentation will be made available, I'd say, in the next couple days. Is that fair to say, Janelle?
Sorry, thought I was unmuted. The city's undergoing a web migration and ran into some issues, so we anticipate to have information up hopefully by the middle to end of this week. But you can always email me directly for any links to the meeting or other information that you may need.
Okay, thanks, Janelle. So with that, I think we're open to questions coming in, and Jill, I guess if you want to field questions, and if you want me to navigate to a particular slide to help give a visual to answer that question, certainly happy to do that.
Yep, thanks, Will. We do have some questions popping up here and appreciate everyone for submitting those. The first question is, oh, they keep jumping as new ones get added. What is the expected improvement in the speed on the road? Will this slow cars down? Yes, that is very much the expectation. Is it kind of that multi-lane, one-way traffic flow as these were designed kind of in the 1960s? The goal here is to actually slow traffic down considerably. That's been shown in other projects like this around the country. I don't know exactly how much it will slow down, but I think we're targeting about 25 miles per hour per traffic. Next question, has a traffic impact study been completed? Yes, there are kind of a couple different studies. One, there is a traffic impact study specific to the Bottle Works development, and then there's also been completed, Will, did your group do a traffic operations analysis, or did we have that done by somebody else before you got involved? I don't remember.
Yeah, I can jump in and help answer that. So there was another consultant that worked with DPW to do a scoping report for this project, and that was before we were on board. Much of the traffic analysis or initial traffic analysis was completed as part of that scoping report, which included looking at how would traffic flow change between College Avenue going southbound and some of the parallel streets around and alternate routes. It also looked at what's the level of service and delay at the intersections, signalized intersections along the corridor. So much of that work was done before we came on board. However, we did also revisit that. We took a couple additional traffic counts and then used the basis of that analysis to help decide and determine turn lanes and turn lane lengths and what kind of signal operations would be um, would be happening at those signalized intersections. So, and we tweaked a few of the assumptions as far as how the traffic would be redistributed, and we wanted to kind of create a worst case scenario so that we were looking at a pretty conservative approach to, how bad could it possibly get if we did XYZ design. So hopefully that helps answer that question.
I'll take the next question. It's, will there be traffic signals added for westbound bikes on New York Street? Understanding that that's a wrong way direction for bikes, but that they use that all the time. So that we're focusing our work here on, on College Avenue itself, but we do have another project underway to look at Michigan and New York Street east of College Avenue. And that is just barely kicked off, and that would be two-way conversion as well. It's like I think the contracts, and they've had a kickoff meeting. They have not determined the actual cross section of those streets, but we're also looking at traffic calming and improved bicycle connectivity. And where appropriate, we will certainly be using bicycle signals because those are now an actual approved traffic control device in the MUTCD, or at least in the new version coming out soon. So for now, I mean, I don't know that we would intentionally signal the wrong way bike lane, but knowing that is actually going to be changing and it won't necessarily be a wrong way bike lane in the future.
Yeah, and Jill, I'll add to that this question wasn't asked, but I'll offer this information that we did also look at what would the operations be at those intersections if Michigan and New York were two-way as opposed to one way. And we just kind of have that in our back pocket, understanding what those operations will look like. So
All right, the next question, Will, if you could discuss how we came to this decision with the bike lane on one side of the street, and well, at least the northbound bike lane, and then switches over to the other side of the street when you get north of Michigan. Can you explain why we did that way?
sure. Um, let's go back to those slides real quick. So the biggest reason that we transition the bike lane here at Michigan from the east side of the street to a two-way cycle track on the west side of the street is because the cultural trail tie-in point, which is right here, is actually not at a signalized location. Um, but we did not want to have northbound bikes on the east side of the street have to cross over to get to that connection without a signal. We didn't want to add a signal there. So we thought this was an opportunity to just have the two-way connection on the west side of the street there. And then as you connect down to the Michigan Street bike lane, the southbound bikes, we expect many of them to actually peel off and use the Michigan Street bike lane because it goes westbound into and towards downtown. The ones that remain obviously can use that Sharrow headed southbound to New York. Um, but also, one of the considerations as far as having the bike lane northbound on this side is because of the historic neighborhood of Lockerbie on the west side and the brick sidewalks and some of the considerations there. We just expected that the parking would be more utilized on the west side of the street here. And so if we were going to pick a direction to have that bike lane connection, we would rather have the northbound side and have it on the east side of the street. And that does make for a little bit of a tricky design at Michigan Street, but we feel like we've accounted for that, at least in preliminary design, but certainly still weighing those alternatives.
All right, the next question is what is the plan for residents during construction to access their homes to and from College Avenue? And of course, we don't have detailed maintenance of traffic plans yet, but we'll always allow people to get to and from their homes. I think this sounds like a big deal of a project, but from a construction standpoint, it's actually pretty minor. We will be resurfacing the road to put a new surface down. So we start fresh with new pavement markings, but it's not a major digging type operation. Will, maybe you can talk a little bit more about how you're anticipating kind of maintaining traffic flow.
Yeah, correct. So we have not done the maintenance of traffic design as of yet. That typically comes after 30%. Um, it will be a pretty basic two-phase uh, maintenance of traffic plan would be my guess, where we will, close one side of the roadway to do, the improvements going southbound, and then flip it and do the other northbound. And I'm putting those in arbitrary order right now. We haven't actually decided that. But the goal through any DPW maintenance of traffic plan is to certainly maintain access to residences and businesses through that construction period. So that is will be no different on this project than other projects where we try to maintain that access. Is that fair to say, Jill?
Indeed, we always make sure that emergency vehicles can get through and that people can get to and from their homes. It might be a little bumpy temporarily, but that's part of getting it all done. But really, it's kind of just like any other resurfacing project that will come by, grind the surface down, and put a fresh surface down.
Yeah, and I'll add that we're not doing major utility relocation work. We're not doing major stormwater type work. So it really is just a resurfacing as far as the pavement goes. There may be a couple areas where we do some deeper patching if we've noticed distress in the pavement, but there isn't substantial utility infrastructure work going on.
All right, next question is what is the estimated timeline for completion? So option A, if we move forward as planned, we bid this fall and it's constructed next year. It's one construction season, so it'll be done by next fall. Now, if we find that North Split is interfering, we could choose to postpone this, as I discussed previously. Either way, it's a one construction season construction project. The question is, if we start as planned, it'll all get done next year. If we have to delay for North Split, it will be sometime after that, but the duration of the construction will be the same either way. Next question, can you talk about the parking and possible removal of parking around the intersection of North and College? Sight lines are pretty poor for eastbound and westbound. I thought we can talk a little bit more about that if you want to, zoom in on that location. So the problem
Yeah,
there is that it's the offset intersection, and sometimes people want to go straight. So we have looked at, I mean, there's a couple different things we can do here. Will, you want to touch on those options again?
sure. So, for folks who are traveling east on North Street here and approaching the intersection here, one of the challenges would have been you had parked cars on either side of the roadway, and it's hard to see traffic from, right now it's the northbound direction, but, in the future it would be hard to see traffic from two directions. Except that now that we have actually bike infrastructure on this side of the roadway, that's going to actually clear up your sight lines to see as you approach from North Street here. So actually, the bike infrastructure in this case sort of mitigates the sight line issues coming east on North Street. Now coming west, we still do have parking, um, and I think the solution there is we may need to trim a couple parking spaces back so that folks approaching westbound on North Street can easily see traffic approaching from southbound or northbound direction. And that's something that we can do with a site distance study as we get into more detailed design. There may be other solutions or approaches that we would take, but that's an example of one. And certainly we saw that from more than one person in public question and comment. So it's something we will definitely consider as we move further into detailed design. Jill, anything to add to that?
Nope, that sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah.
I'm switching from the Q&A section to the chat section where we got some other questions posted there.
Okay.
Can you tell us how this idea came up and why we haven't heard about it before? Have you analyzed present traffic flows on College, especially the evening rush hour? I'll address the history a little bit. I know a fellow that Will and I used to work with about 20 years ago was talking about converting College from one-way to two-way. So it's not a new idea. It's been bounced around for a really long time. It has gained some traction also nationally as part of an increased emphasis on pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, which includes slowing down vehicle traffic to make it safer. So lots of ideas being noodled around. Why we haven't heard about it sooner is because usually at this 30% stage is the earliest that we bring concepts to the public. Sometimes projects are completely designed and then there's a public hearing and we get to say, well, too bad we already designed it. This is what we're doing. This is what you can expect. But 30% design is actually an early time in the project to be hearing about it. So this is good that we're able to talk about it now and get your feedback at a time when we're still able to make some changes. And then have we studied current traffic flows? Well, current traffic flows are kind of weird, aren't they? There's the North Split thing going on. And then before that, present traffic flows were severely impacted. We're still seeing impacts downtown because of COVID. There's less traffic downtown than there used to be. So the good news is we have not studied traffic in over a year. We studied it pre-pandemic when traffic volumes were at their highest. So yes, we have studied it. We've done counts and traffic studies all before we started seeing people going home and the decreases in traffic. So we're planning on that higher volume of traffic that we used to have. And then kind of in the future, no one really knows if downtown is going to return to the previous level of traffic? Are people going to continue? A lot of people are working kind of a hybrid schedule of home and office. Some people are in the office full time. Some people are staying at home full time. So we are still seeing less traffic than usual downtown. But we did, at least for this project, we planned on the higher volumes of traffic in our design.
Yeah, and I don't have the traffic counts in front of me right now, but it's 2017, 2018 timeframe is where that data was collected. So, um, obviously that's pre-pandemic and when we were seeing pretty healthy traffic volumes. So, I think I said earlier, we tried to look at a conservative sort of worst case traffic scenario. Whether that will be the case in the future, we really don't know. The future is certainly changing.
The next question is, will you be converting East Street to two-way as well to balance flows? Yeah, East Street is one of the streets that we have studied, and we think it would be a good candidate for a two-way conversion. We have several streets that we think would be good candidates. Um, they all cost something, so we can't implement everything all at once, but we do already have the Central Avenue converted to two-way, so actually East Street is already a little bit imbalanced, I think, anyway. Fort Wayne Avenue, which is partly two-way and then it goes to one-way, that's another one that we're looking at converting. So I think we're going to see a little bit of an evolution and kind of continued shift of traffic patterns in the downtown area. But we did do a study where we kind of looked at them all at once to make sure that we still have enough capacity to get traffic in and out of downtown, regardless of what street they end up being on, whether it's a one-way or a two-way. So we have kind of a whole to-do list that we will be implementing probably over the next several years as we're able to identify funding to make that happen. So this is just actually already completed. There was Michigan and New York in the IUPUI area over the last 5 or so years. And then I guess we took a little bit of a break, this being the next one. But as I mentioned, Michigan and New York to the east is something else we've looked at doing. And we have several that we've started to look at in various stages of study and design.
And Jill, I believe the Central Avenue was also converted from Fall Creek to 10th Street, and that was pretty recently as well, within the last couple years.
Yes, it was. And initially, the rest of Fort Wayne was to be converted at the same time, but it had to do with the bridge, the Central Avenue Bridge over Fall Creek, and then there was the intersection at 10th Street and East Street, Central, and Fort Wayne that had to be modified. And there's also some Indigo bus stop improvements planned for Fort Wayne. So early on, those kind of things were all going to kind of happen at once, and they ended up not quite all happening at once, which is why I think we haven't seen the rest of the Fort Wayne conversion yet. I don't think, but
Yeah, that's
so
correct.
yes, all of those things do kind of tie together. Again, about the timeline of the project. So our next steps is we actually will be going to IHPC for a hearing that will be in either July or August, depending how quickly we can. We left our plans at 30%, so we get some feedback. So we're gonna take some feedback and then get our plans into a little bit better condition, and then take them to the historic preservation for their approval. They're concerned about things like curb modifications primarily. That process will have, there is a public hearing as part of that process. So again, that will happen at either their July or their August meeting, depending on us. And then, yeah, if all goes well, again, we would bid in September for construction next year, or we might choose to delay it if we think North Split is going to interfere. Thoughts of improving parking elsewhere. Someone actually did a study, and most people find this hard to believe, myself included, that the entire Mass Avenue district has actually more parking than it needs. And this was done pre-COVID. But with that, the Bottle Works is bringing a lot of new parking spaces as part of their development. They've got a garage, they've got some new on-street parking. There are plenty of parking options. And then we hope that residents, many of which have parking on their own properties, I guess. And for guests, at least from my own experience, I'm a frequent visitor to this corridor. The many restaurants and entertainment establishes. My preferred parking place is at home, somewhere else, and then I like to use either a ride share or transit or my bicycle to get around Mass Avenue. So that is where I recommend you park is at home somewhere else. At least from my experience, that's the easiest thing to do. But there are, if you, I personally never park on Mass Avenue. If I do drive down this area, there are quite a few parking spaces around the neighborhood, and that's what a parking analysis a couple of years ago found is that there is plenty of off-street parking options in this area. It just may not be exactly in front of the place where you're wanting to go. Will, what are you doing to provide early warning to traffic regarding the change to avoid any potential accidents upon opening?
Oh, great question. I mean, I think that probably I'll kick that back to DPW because I think they do public outreach on that front, informational campaigns and the like. Janelle, do you happen to know the answer to that?
If they're referring to construction, we will notify residents in the area when about 2 weeks before the construction begins, to allow them an opportunity to ask questions and find out how that's going to impact them specifically. We also provide media with information of any road closures, traffic detours around this area when construction begins, and put that information on Nextdoor and social media as well. So, I mean, we're here to work with the residents and businesses to make sure that they don't encounter any impacts or as little as impact as possible when the construction begins, and answer any questions that they might have regarding the construction. So we're always available and happy to help answer those questions when that time comes.
I was not around when we had our other two-way conversion projects open to traffic, so I assume maybe we've got some tricks. There are some devices uh, around attention getting devices and that sort of thing that can be used on a temporary basis. There's also the little bit of a warning when there's for the kind of daily drivers is the actual construction going on. There will be some degree of lane restrictions and whatnot, and then once it's completed or once the actual changeover occurs, there will be plenty of visual cues, the signs, the signals, the markings, telling you where you should be going. So I don't remember hearing at least that there was any sort of problem with the other locations when those were open to two-way traffic.
Yeah, I will add that it's certainly a concern anytime you change a roadway from one way to two way, because there is a new there is a new movement that people are not necessarily expecting or aware of. And we certainly try to mitigate that on the design side with as Jill mentioned those visual cues and signals, signage, markings. But then that's in accompaniment with DPW's informational campaign.
To be fair, I don't think we're 100% successful to keep people from going the wrong way down College today. So
That's correct.
um,
That's correct.
that happens. People sometimes make mistakes on all of our one-way streets. So in fact, converting it to two-way perhaps is bringing it more in line with people's expectations. Next question, how will semi trucks handle College, and particularly the right turns from the Ohio Street Interstate ramp? They currently use all three lanes of College to accomplish those turns.
Yeah, I think I saw this question come in earlier in the week as well, and we'll need to do some auto turn analysis on how those turns can work, and also look at where are those deliveries happening, and that's something that we'll get into in more detailed design. Um, but yeah, that's certainly a consideration. Also, what is DPW's appetite for having semi trucks on College going forward? That's going to be part of the discussion as well. Is there a need to rethink how truck routes work? And those are questions I can't answer today. But knowing where deliveries happen now and what our alternate routes may help inform that. So any specific information people can offer about where deliveries happen now and how those work, that's certainly helpful to the design team.
Yep, and we did have one question submitted by email earlier today, a specific business with a specific concern about access. So if there's anyone else listening that has a specific business that receives truck deliveries, please do contact us using the information on the last slide. We'd love to know what size of truck you're using and how they get to your facility. And we have a software program that simulates truck movements, so we can test that against our design and figure out how we can make that happen. Okay, the next question is, excuse me, if there's no center turn lane, won't that result in additional backup, especially in areas with valet parking? Well, we don't have room for a center turn lane really here. If this is a suburban area with unlimited space, a center turn lane would allow for more capacity. But it also is more width, which means longer crosswalks and higher speeds of traffic. So we are counting on a little bit of congestion. We think for a downtown urban street, going slow and experiencing other vehicles and people and bicycles around you is a good thing. This is no longer going to be an expressway along from south to north on the east side of downtown. As far as the valet parking goes, I'm not real clear how those work today. Usually those would take either an on-street parking space and sort of commandeer it for use in their valet, or they would have that take place on their private property. So yeah, they should not be interfering with our limited travel lanes. They should be doing that outside of the main vehicle travel lanes.
And
Will,
Jill,
you have anything to add?
yeah, I'll add that we did work to introduce dedicated turn lane areas at specific intersections. Here's one of them going southbound on College. This is at New York. Certainly, we don't want left turners here backing up the through traffic to the extent possible. So that's an example of introducing a dedicated turning space at a particular intersection. Same thing here going northbound at Michigan. We have dedicated space for turns so that through traffic can pass around it. At unsignalized intersections, we don't necessarily have that. North Street is, for instance, we are maybe considering it there. Certainly something we've discussed in the past few weeks, especially with comments coming in. So is it possible we would introduce a turn lane here? Maybe. Um, Definitely something we're considering.
Next question. There are over 5,000 dogs downtown. Please can you address pedestrian improvements, including crosswalks? And I will start by addressing that one thing I've realized in my role as multimodal is that the dog walker is kind of its own special mode, isn't it? I find myself out counting traffic, and I'll count bicycles and I'll count joggers and then I'll count dogs separately. So I'm going to shamelessly promote my own dogs who are super cute and say that I also am a dog walker. And then I will turn it over to Will to discuss possible pedestrian crossing improvements along the corridor.
Sure. Well, one thing is just getting all corner curb ramps up to ADA acceptable design. What we've done along the corridor is looked at what are the corner curb ramp conditions now? Do any of them need to be improved? And we'll certainly do that. Another thing is anywhere we have bike infrastructure that's giving extra buffer space between travel lanes and the existing sidewalk. We're also doing an existing sidewalk inventory to make sure we have, if there are stretches of sidewalk that are in disrepair, we want to go ahead and replace those as part of this project. Um, if there are connectivity issues along the sidewalk or gaps in the sidewalk, certainly want those replaced as part of the project as well. Um, we have run across several conditions where there are large overhead utility poles in the sidewalk, and those are challenging for particularly wheelchairs to negotiate. So we will look at the clearance there and see if there is a way to design appropriate ADA clearance around obstructions within the sidewalk. Um, from a cost perspective, it may not be possible to correct all those, but we're certainly going to inventory and look at them and do what we can to fix those.
What about crossing College Avenue, Will? Did you
Oh,
cover
sure.
that? I apologize.
No, I didn't, and thank you for reminding me. So there are five signalized intersections within the corridor: Market, Ohio, New York, Michigan, and Massachusetts Avenue. So those all provide signalized locations within 2/3 of a mile. If you go back to our um, project location map, the total distance is about 2/3 of a mile, and we have five opportunities currently to cross at a signalized crossing. Now, does that mean that every desired east-west crossing is covered with a crosswalk right now? No. Would we consider additional ones? Yes. I think we already talked about North Street, the potential for an east-west crossing there. That's kind of our biggest gap within the project. If you're looking at here, we have a signal at Michigan. Here we have a signal at St. Clair, Mass Ave. So that's probably the longest gap without an east-west crossing. So that's one of the reasons we're taking a deeper look at North Street and seeing if something is warranted there. But certainly feel free in public feedback to give us, where is there an east-west crossing pedestrian movement that demands that kind of treatment.
We were also asked about potentially marking a crossing at Vermont Street, and we looked at that as well. The geometry at North Street lends itself a little bit better to doing some kind of crossing. If we were to do it at Vermont, we would have to remove several additional parking spaces. So, as we already discussed, we're kind of trying to keep most of the parking on one side of the street while we're removing it from the other side. If we were to do a crosswalk at Vermont, we would actually lose several additional parking spaces because in order to have a safe and controlled crossing, you need between 20 and 50 feet of unobstructed views. And having the bicycle infrastructure on one side means that's a clear unobstructed view. But anywhere there's parked cars, then we'd have to have 20 to 50 feet in each direction in addition to the width of the crosswalk itself. So with Vermont being um, just between Michigan and New York. It's just a block in either direction. We were thinking that the loss of several parking spaces might be too much for that crosswalk, but we welcome people's comments to that effect. If you would rather have a marked crossing with some flashing lights and lose several parking spaces, let me know. If you would prefer to retain a few parking spaces and walk that extra block to Michigan or New York to cross at those signals, drop us a note and let us know what would be your preference there. I'm going to switch back over to the Q&A section here. Will the 16-person beer bikes be restricted from the new bike lanes? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if they are permitted to use bike lanes currently. I am unfamiliar. I did those once, and from my recollection, they try to go where they will only block one lane of traffic and not all traffic. Um, but I would say I'm guessing they're not allowed to use the regular bike lanes, and if that's the case, they wouldn't be allowed to use these bike lanes. But I'm not certain what is the regulation uh, behind the beer bikes. I don't know if Will or Janelle knows anything about those.
I just know that they exist. I don't know associated regulations. I have never seen them use a bike lane. That's very anecdotally my sample size, but yeah, I have not seen them use a bike lane. I've only seen them use a travel lane, and I have never seen them use college. So um, that's all very myopic answers specific to my experience. But
Yeah,
I guess the answer is I don't know.
my knowledge is the same as Will's. I've never seen them use an actual bike lane. I've just seen them in using a regular traffic lane. But I don't know. We would have to go and do some extra research on that.
And it kind of depends what it's classified. I think some of them have a motorized assist, which makes it a motor vehicle, which means it should not be using the bike lanes. But the one I did one time was strictly human powered, but it's not a regular bicycle. I don't even know how well, I mean, it would be a tight fit to get in and out of the bike lanes, especially if we've got it protected with a curb. I don't know that that would even be comfortable for them to get in there, but I'm not sure that they would be allowed anyway. Um, I see a comment that I don't think has a question, but sort of to that effect. Yes, I do walk. I have walked this entire corridor. I've also driven it. I actually spent most of my morning on this corridor, so I'm very familiar with it. The beer bikes do use college now. They are a hazard. So maybe that's something I can ask. Maybe we can ask our contacts at IMPD or legal what bikes are actually allowed to do. I'm not sure if anything we're doing on college would change um, the attractiveness of this corridor for the beer bikes. But we'll look into that. That because with one lane in each direction, that would cause a little bit of a backlog that could be problematic. So we will look into that. Fortunately, we have plenty of time to figure it out. Let's see. Come back up to the chat. Why is this happening? What are the benefits expected from this change? If the change was all the way to Virginia, it would make more sense. But why is it important to change this section only? So yes, traffic flow wise, it does make sense to convert the entire corridor. But what we found, as Will had shown us earlier in the project limits, that we've got some challenges at the College and Washington intersection with that bridge, the rail bridge, the rail underpass with the three narrow lanes that actually go both ways under the diagonal bridge, where we've got already certain movements are restricted, trucks are restricted, and I spent some time this morning watching trucks get stuck underneath there. Um, so with introducing two-way traffic and more movements, we would have more movements to restrict that potentially people would not follow and more trucks to get stuck underneath. So um, that that challenge was a little beyond us for the scope of this project. This particular project was prioritized by the influx of traffic to the Bottle Works area. So we thought we could improve access between the interstate and Bottle Works with this kind of more easily achieved section of college. There's also only so much money to go around. So the rest of college is definitely something we would consider. Really, travel speeds are an issue on that south part of college as well. I spent some time observing traffic down there as well. Would love to flip that section as well. East Street's another great candidate. These are all possible. Please send your millions of dollars of donations to me and we can make that happen a little bit sooner than planned. But yeah, we don't want to cause total chaos. We're going to do this project and kind of do one project at a time rather than mass changes all at once.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that question probably came in after the first part of our presentation, um, where we did talk about, I think we had the same question up front was why did it not connect down to Virginia? Um, but I think there are still benefits that we're seeing just from doing this section of the corridor, in so much as we are giving access from folks on the north end of college, particularly down to recent development on Market Street to the west of college. Several substantial projects have been built in recent years. There, we're also giving access to the Washington Street interchange via Davidson Street, Market to Davidson to that interchange. So there's some key connections at the south end to what's all the development that's happened on the north end, including Bottle Works. That's the biggest thing is just creating the connectivity between those things.
How will reducing lanes of traffic handle rush hour traffic on College Avenue? Well, rush hour is always rush hour when everybody decides to go to the same place at the same time. So there's always going to be a surge of traffic during the rush hour if everyone decides to leave at once. But we have done a traffic analysis and found that we can get adequate operations on College. We do think that some traffic, especially those that want to go really fast, and we're making it so they can't go really fast, the ones that want that free flowing one way street, I think they're going to find another route. Some traffic, I think, will divert and take another way because we're forcing them to slow down and pay attention to pedestrians and bicycles as part of this corridor. Therefore, making it, much more neighborly corridor and rather than an expressway to the north. So we think it will handle it just fine. Next question is, will the brick sidewalks be impacted? In some places, they could stand to be smoothed out. I know our intent is to minimize the impacts to sidewalks and especially within the historic district. Anything we do touch will be approved by IHPC. But Will, maybe you can talk about have you assessed the curb ramps in the project area to know if we're um, needing to make any changes for ADA accessibility?
We haven't done our existing sidewalk inventory, so we have not looked at the kind of longitudinal sidewalk condition. We have looked at corner curb ramps. I don't remember offhand whether we were hoping to improve any along that stretch on the west side of College between New York and Michigan, but if they are not up to ADA standard, then they will be addressed in one way or the other. We don't have to answer the question about things needing to be smoothed out. We had not originally talked about removing and resetting bricks and creating a smoother connection. But that's something DPW, if they want us to do, we can look at.
Completely unrelated, but in this area, I know there is a project to resurface Vermont Street that's up against our project. So to the west of College, I think that was an INDY project where the neighborhood chipped in, at least for pavement, but I don't think that impacts sidewalks. I just lost my place. Okay. Would it not make sense until north split improvements are completed before considering these changes? It seems like traffic flows may change once the project is completed. Yes, traffic flows will change, especially with the kind of change in ramp directions and whatnot. There are ways to get on and off the interstate. However, we'd rather not wait like that long. I mean, we may wait because of the construction if we find that people are using College as a detour and we feel like we don't want to further delay traffic. Um, but no, we think that this road needs these improvements. We want it to be more of a pedestrian and bicycle friendly corridor and local access friendly corridor, regardless of what INDOT may or may not be doing over the interstate. So while we are trying not to make the construction detour any worse than it is, we think this project needs to be moving forward regardless of the interstate access. Next question, who will pay for changes to curb cuts? Some are designed now for northbound access only and will need to be redone to allow turns from the southbound lane. The answer is maybe. There are, for one thing, we're not removing any access. So 100%, if you can get to something from northbound College now, you will continue to be able to access it from northbound College in the future. But if there's a desire to modify access, kind of depends if that's in the public right of way. If it's just a matter of modifying an angled curb cut, that's probably something we're going to tear up anyway as part of our project with the given that we're doing the bike lanes and the other modifications. So if something's just angled and there's a desire to angle it the other way, That's something we can include in the project. If the changes are on private property, as Will said, we're not doing any, we're not acquiring any right of way. We're not going to be doing any work on private property as part of this project. So if you're the private part of your access doesn't allow um, traffic from South Bend, then you may not want to continue to leave it there. But if you're getting there from Northbound College today, you will always be able to get there from Northbound College. Do you have anything to add to that?
Nothing to add from my end, but if there is a specific location, it certainly helps for us to have it flagged and we can discuss it. And I think I did see at least one of those that was brought up in questions that were received earlier this week. So that's something we'll take a closer look at.
Will there be a new curb cut to join the bike lane to the cultural trail? And I think, Will, you said you were still, maybe you want to go to that slide um, or even to the Google map of the cultural trail access point to show how that's going to go. Since I know your sheet cuts off on a weird spot, it might be easy, and it's kind of hard to see the cultural trail on that aerial for some reason. It's like in the shadow. Do you have the Google view? We can just kind of show where our bike lane would go in the Google.
Uh, yeah. I mean, so here on this slide we have a couple pictures of the
Oh, there
trail.
you go.
This is essentially up in the upper right hand corner. This picture is where we would tie in, and what we're doing right now is getting additional survey at this location to see what's possible. It's definitely pretty hairy, and we're trying to figure out how to do it in the safest and smoothest possible way. But it would require a curb modification uh, to make that connection because we're going from street level up to the cultural trail level, which is sidewalk level. So TBD on that, but yeah, there's some design that needs to be done there.
That's definitely the intent. That's why we're running the cycle track on the west side in order to connect directly to the cultural trail. But
Correct.
it's just a matter of figuring out the actual geometry of how that little bicycle intersection will take place.
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of fun stuff to try to avoid up here too. So we're looking forward to that.
And all of these curb modifications is what I think IHPC is looking to, that we will need to get this approved by them because that's considered a modification to the roadway. Whereas if we were just resurfacing and stuff, then that wouldn't fall under, and the whole corridor actually falls within the historic district. I'm going back and forth, and I don't think I see additional questions. Janelle, are there any that I have missed?
I do see one. Have you done an air quality and noise study? Did we?
We did not. This is a locally funded project, so we did not go through the NEPA process. Yeah, Will, I don't know if you want to address anything regarding that, but those are the kind of things that are it's required for federally funded projects. This project is 100% locally funded.
That's correct. We have not, and at least at this point, do not have plans to look at noise or air quality.
Might there be some consideration to having all vehicular traffic stop at an intersection to allow pedestrian crossing? Southbound College at St. Clair, Mass has a no right turn sign that is not followed at all.
We don't currently have any pedestrian scramble intersections in Indianapolis, and I have a few locations that I think that would be a great idea. So we haven't quite, I mean, there is a lot of pedestrian traffic there. I agree with you about that no right turn. It's kind of weird because I think it's intended to be no right turn to St. Clair, but you're allowed to go to Mass Avenue, but it doesn't really distinguish between those. Give it, even with my experience as a traffic engineer, I don't quite understand that one myself. So that is not off the table. We haven't gotten that far along, but there are several locations that I would like to do a pedestrian scramble, which is when all vehicles stop and the pedestrians can cross in every direction. Since we don't have one currently, I think it'll be a little bit of an uphill battle to get the first one approved. And I think once we get the first one approved, I think it might be popular and we might do some elsewhere. So that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been on that corner many times with kids and stuff, and it's definitely that's a challenging corner. So it's something we can certainly look at and see if there's clarity or a better way to prevent those illegal right turns from happening.
Or allow them if, or I don't quite know why they're not allowed. I haven't, that's confusing for me as well. So that's definitely something, at least maybe we need to explain to me why you can't turn right there.
Cultural trail crossing is the biggest reason that I assume the right turns are prevented there on red.
Yeah, definitely on red, but it's no right turn whatsoever. And actually, right turns on red, now that we brought that up, that is something we're considering at several locations along this corridor, where visibility is limited, and then we're adding a different travel direction. So there'll be a new way to turn right on red that there wasn't before. So that's an ordinance revision to get that accomplished. So we'll come up with the areas that we think should be this, then that actually needs to go to our council for approval. So, but we do have some ideas about where there should be locations, restrictions such as a no right turn on red, as that we would implement as part of this project.
Those appear to be all the questions that we have from our participants. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap the meeting up. And Will, if you wouldn't mind scrolling to the last slide so everyone can see contact information if in case they have any questions that they think of after the meeting. The website below is where our information and link to our meeting recording will be posted, hopefully within a few days this week. But please feel free to reach out to me directly with any questions related to this project, any concerns, and we'll be sure to share those with the project team and get you a response back. So I just want to say thank you for coming and attending tonight. We've had a lot of good information, a lot of good questions come out of the meeting, and we just look forward to moving through the process as best we can, as quickly as we can, considering we have 18 months of INDOT construction going around as a next door neighbor. So again, thank you for attending, and please send us your questions, comments. We're interested to hear them and respond to them because we're very interested to hear what our constituents think. So good evening.